Friends, shalom, and greetings to you all. Welcome to our annual reading of the book of Esther, one of two biblical books named for women. The other is the book of Ruth. Now, both are extremely incredible stories of love and spirit. The characters we read about are real, but we don't know how true the story actually is. And it doesn't matter. It symbolizes the unconquerable soul and spirit of a meek hero and of a people who cannot be destroyed. It reminds us that we never know what's going to happen, that the unexpected can be around any corner, and we never need fear, and we as individuals can never be destroyed. Now, we're all descendants of that people who have struggled with faith and belief, but still hold fast to some kind of belief in a power beyond our own. Now, we know that many of the characters in the story are actually historic characters, and like most ancient stories, it's part fable and it's part history, and it's always exciting for us when history comes alive. We connect to it differently. Now, the story of Esther takes place shortly after the story of the 300 Spartans, which was about 480 years before the Common Era. Now, this holiday is considered a minor holiday. And minor does not mean less important. It means added post-writing of the Torah, whereas major holidays are those listed in the Torah. Now, the two major minor holidays are actually both miracle stories, and we all love miracles. And this one occurred about 300 years before the miracle festival we celebrate each year, the miracle of Hanukkah, or rededication. Well, the megillah Esther, book of Esther, became the last of the 24 books of the Hebrew Bible to be canonized by the sages of the Great Assembly, which was like a holy council of about 120 scribes, sages, and prophets from the Second Temple period through to the Hellenistic period, and it was comprised of the scholars of the time: Zechariah, Ezra, Daniel, Nehemiah, Zerubbabel. It's kind of like a who's who of Second Temple biblical lore. And while we do not know for certain, it is believed it was they who introduced the Feast of Purim to the established holy days of the existing calendar. Now remember, these events happened hundreds of years subsequent to the writing of the Torah. Now, according to the Talmud, this book was a redaction or an edit of an original text by Mordechai, one of the chief characters in the story. As I said, it's usually dated to the 4th century before the Common Era, which actually fits with the days of Xerxes I, who's another of the characters who came, to the throne in 486, before the Common Era, and he's the king in this book. Now, it, like so much of the Torah, seems to have been edited from different versions and different stories, and it's actually told in 10 parts. And there are Greek versions, there's Hebrew versions, there's Latin versions, there's even Coptic and Ethiopian versions. Each are, of course, slightly different. And so, as you see, there's no one simple book of Esther, and there is no unedited version that we can go by. Like all good stories, there's a hero and a heroine, our protagonists, faced with a conflict that they must resolve, and there is an antagonist, the obstacle to be overcome. And our characters' names are not Hebrew, but Babylonian. The story as we know it comes from the time of the first exile in Babylon, which resulted in much cross-cultural pollination. The calendar's the same, the name's the same, many of the stories are the same. And because this was a story believed to have been written by a participant, Mordechai, it's given greater credence. And there was a rabbinic determination that everyone is obligated to listen to a live reading of the Megillah on Purim. Some do, most do not. It is read in Hebrew. Some understand it. Most, once again, do not. Now, friends, over the years, we've discovered that many ancient texts were authored by people using pseudonyms, generally of famous people, to add credence to the authenticity of the story. This story is so great that it doesn't matter if it was the actual Mordechai or someone else who wrote it down. It has come down to us as a living testament to spirit and survival, and that stands as a lesson to us all. And perhaps the most interesting thing about it is the book of Esther is a non-religious diaspora story about and presumably for Jews in the first diaspora during the Persian exile, providing an optimistic picture of Jewish survival and success in a foreign land. And that's something that's never changed. That is the history of the Jewish people. And it is a book in which God actually appears nowhere, not even by name, and is not even mentioned. So there's no rules, no prayers, no do's, no don'ts, other than be yourself, your real self. Have fun. And even though you were to be yourself, people these days dress in costume because one of the morals of the story is nothing is as it seems. Now, this makes it different from Halloween. I know people love to call Purim the Jewish Halloween, but it's not. The costumes serve a different purpose, and in this case, it's, as you will see, everything historically expected did not turn out. So remember, nothing is as it seems, and that's what the costumes are all about. Now, there's certain things that stand out in the story. The names of the protagonists, for instance, Mordechai and Esther. Esther's real name was Hadassah, which means myrtle, as in myrtle tree. And this was changed to Ishtar, the queen of the gods of Babylon, a name everybody would be familiar with, which is translated as Esther, and her uncle or guardian, who was really her cousin, Mordechai, which comes from two words, Marduk, who was the king of the gods, and Chai, meaning breath, which was the Hebrew emanation of the name for God. So Mordechai became Mordechai. Now, the translation I'm going to read is my translation, and my translation has pretty well stuck to the original meanings of words, more than, just taking pure poetic license. But I have made some minor changes, and I'll point them out as we come across them. There are plenty of translations available, my friends, should you wish one. And I do encourage everybody at some point in time in their life to go to listen to a reading in a synagogue where the cantillation is a language unto itself. The ritual chanting of biblical Hebrew is truly a musical sound. It was used to help distinguish meaning, and it adds to the ritual. But you don't have to understand to simply sit back and enjoy as you would any symphony. Except this is a symphony of words and feelings and dreams of hope. So sit back and enjoy the whole megillah, the word for scroll or book, and generally now considered a long, boring story, but not in this case. It's not so bad. It's a story that has some interesting twists and fascinating characters. It is the story of bravery, and it is the story of the first two great biblical women, each for a different reason. And remember, this is the time to let you be free to be you. Be congruent, be mindful, be conscious. Be yourself, my friends, 24 hours a day. So no matter who you are or what you believe, it is not hard to understand that love, faith, strength, and desire will overcome any adversity. Just imagine what such a world would be like. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. A brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one. Now, the name of this holiday comes from gambling, from dice. Purim. A pur was a lot. So this is the lot casting genocide that did not take place. And it's a story that's told in 10 parts, but none are really that long. Now, the Reader's Digest of the story is the Persian Empire of the 4th century before the Common Era extended over 127 different lands. And all the Jews were its subjects. Now, when King Ahasuerus had his wife, Queen Vashti, executed or exiled for failing to follow his orders, he orchestrated a beauty pageant to find a new queen. A Jewish girl named Esther, Ishtar, found favor in his eyes and became the new queen, though she refused to divulge the identity of her nationality. Now, meanwhile, this anti-Semitic Haman was appointed prime minister of the empire. Mordecai, the leader of the Jews and Esther's cousin, refused to bow to Haman. Haman was incensed and convinced, that Mordecai was just an enemy of his. And he convinced the king to issue a decree ordering the extermination of all the Jews on the 13th of Adar. And that was a date chosen by lottery, Apur. Now Mordecai spurred all the Jews on, convincing them to repent, to fast, and pray to God for some kind of salvation. Meanwhile, Esther asked the king and Haman to join her for a feast, and at the feast, Esther revealed to the king her Jewish identity. Haman was hanged, Mordecai was appointed prime minister, and a new decree was issued granting the Jews the right to defend themselves against their enemies. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu el mirah megillah. Blessed are you, Lord, our God, cosmic majesty, who sanctifies us through mitzvot and commands us concerning the reading of the Megillah. V'hayi b'mi Achashverosh, hu Achashverosh hamolach, nachodu va'ad kush, seba va'eshrin, u'mea medina. And it came to pass, in the days of Ahasuerus, who we'll simply refer to as Xerxes from now on, the same Xerxes who ruled from Hodu to Kash, or India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces. It's a huge empire, my friends, which within about 100 years, Alexander the Great would conquer and expand. In those days, King Xerxes established his royal throne in Susa, the capital, and in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast for all of his ministers and servants, the army of Persia and Media, the nobles, and all the ministers of the provinces and his servants. For 180 days he displayed the glorious wealth of his kingdom and the splendorous beauty of his majesty. And when these days came to an end, the king made a 7-day feast in the courtyard of his palace garden for everyone in Susa, noblemen and commoner alike, for all were treated equally. That was pretty unusual, too. There were hangings of white, green, and blue, held by cords of linen and purple wool to silver rods, marble pillows. There were couches of gold and silver on a floor of alabaster and marble, arranged in patterns of rows and circles. Drinks were served in golden vessels, each of a different design. And the royal wine was in abundance as befitting the king. The drinking was done according to the edict without limit, because the king ordered all the stewards of his household to comply with each man's wish. Now, Queen Vashti also made a feast for the women in the royal palace of the king. On the 7th day, when the king's heart was merry with wine, he ordered Mahuman, Bizata, Shavrona Bigta, Avagata, Zaitar, and Sharkas, the 7 supervisors who attended the king, to bring Queen Vashti wearing only the royal crown to show her beauty to the nations and ministers, for she was indeed beautiful. But Queen Vashti refused to appear, and the king grew furious, and his wrath seethed within him. Now notice that we see Queen Vashti is beautiful and headstrong, independent and willful. She is more the feminine equal than any other biblical character we ever come across. She might very well be the first feminist. As you get to know Esther, you will see the marked contrast. Esther was demure and submissive, obedient and docile. She ended up epitomizing the perfect queen. How interesting that she and not Vashti is the heroine of this story. What did that say about the role of women for thousands of years? Now, we just had International Women's Day. It would have been nice to have recognized Vashti, perhaps. So the king conferred with the sages, those knowledgeable of the precedents, because it was the king's custom to confer with those who were versed in every law and statute. Those closest to him were Karshina, Shetar, and Mata, Tarshish, Meres, Marsina, and Mamushkan. These were the 7 ministers of Persia and Media who had access to the king and ranked highest in the kingdom. He asked them, by law, what should be done with Queen Vashti for failing to obey my order? Mamushkan declared before the king and the ministers, it's not against the king alone that the Queen Vashti has sinned, but against all the ministers and all nations in the provinces of King Xerxes. For word of the queen's deed will reach all the women, and it will belittle their husbands in their eyes. For they will say, King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti be brought before me, yet she did not come. This very day, the noble women of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's deed will repeat it to all the king's nobles. There will be much disgrace and anger. If it please the king, let a royal edict be issued by him, but let it be written into the laws of Persia and Media, and let it not be revoked, that Queen Vashti may never again appear before King Xerxes. Let the king confer her royal title upon another woman who is better than she. And the king's decree, which he shall proclaim, will be heard throughout his kingdom, for it is indeed significant, and all the women will respect their husbands, noblemen and commoner alike. There were no real rights for women, and there were no Me Too movements back then. Now, the idea pleased the king and the ministers, and the king did as Memucan had advised. He sent letters to all the provinces, each written in the language of the province. Now that's pretty amazing, because what he's doing is he's honoring the language of each of the provinces and also ensuring there were no mistakes, because the language would be understood. And basically the message said, every man shall be master in his home, and that everyone in the household should speak the language of his nation. Now after these events, when King Xerxes' wrath had abated, he remembered Vashti, what she had done and what had happened with her. So the king's attendants advised, let beautiful virgin girls be sought for the king. And let the king appoint officers in all the province of his kingdom, and let them gather every beautiful virgin girl to Susa, the capital, to the harem, under the charge of Haggai, the king's eunuch, custodian of the women. Let their cosmetics be provided. And let the girl who finds favor in the king's eyes become the queen in Vashti's place. Now the plan pleased the king, and he acted accordingly. Now there was a Jewish man in Susa whose name was Mordechai, son of Yair, son of Shmei, son of Kish, a Benjaminite. So we now know the tribe of Mordechai, who had been exiled from Jerusalem with those that had been exiled along with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had sent into exile. It's all historically true. He had raised his cousin Hadassah, also called Esther, Ishtar, after her parents died. Now remember, Hadassah means myrtle, which is a special tree because biblical righteous men were likened to trees and therefore called myrtles. The girl was shapely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Mordechai adopted her as his daughter. Now when the king's order and edict became known, and many girls were gathered to Susa, the capital, under the charge of Haggai, Esther was also taken to the palace under the eunuch's charge. The girl found favor in his eyes, won his kindness, so that he hurried to provide her with cosmetics and meals and 7 maids that were to be given her from the palace. He also transferred her and her maids to the best rooms in the harem. Now during this entire time, Esther did not divulge her race or ancestry, for Mordechai had instructed her not to tell. Every day, Mordechai would walk down in front of the harem courtyard to find out how Esther was faring, what was happening with her. And when each girl's turn came to go to King Xerxes, after undergoing the prescribed 12-month preparation for women, 6 months with the oil of myrrh, 6 months with perfumes and women's cosmetics, that particular girl would be provided with whatever she requested to accompany her from the harem to the palace, and in the evening she would go to the king. In the morning she would return to the second harem under the charge of the custodian of the concubines. She would not go to the king again unless the king desired her, whereupon she would be summoned by name. When the time came for Esther, daughter of Achichail, the uncle of Mordechai who had taken her as a daughter, to go to the king, she did not ask for a thing other than that which Haggai, the king's eunuch, custodian of the women, had told her to take. And Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. Esther was taken to King Xerxes, to his palace, in the 10th month, which is the month of Tevet, the 7th year of his reign. Now remember, the story begins in the 3rd year of his reign. So here we are, 4 years after Vashti's exile. The king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won his favor and kindness more than all the other virgins. So he placed the royal crown on her head and made her queen in Vashti's stead. Now in ancient times, in many places, royalty assumed different names upon ascending the throne. And we don't know if Esther, Ishtar, was already her name or whether it was a queen name bestowed upon her, as royalty always assumed a new name. And we will witness that in our own lifetimes. And we probably will never know what the truth of Esther's name is. Then the king made a grand feast for all his ministers and servants called the Feast of Esther. And he lowered the taxes for the provinces and gave out royal gifts. And when the virgins were gathered a second time, Mordecai was appointed to sit at the king's gate. Esther would still not divulge her ancestry or race, as Mordecai had instructed her. Indeed, Esther followed Mordecai's instructions, just as she had done while under his care. One day, while Mordecai sat at the king's gate, Bigtan and Teresh, two of the king's supervisors from the threshold guards, became angry and planned to assassinate King Xerxes. The matter became known to Mordecai, and he informed Queen Esther. Esther then informed the king of it in Mordecai's name. The matter was investigated and found to be true, and the two were hanged on the gallows. It was then recorded in the Book of Chronicles before the king. Now, after these events, King Xerxes promoted Haman, son of Hamdata the Agagite, and advanced him. He placed his seat above all his fellow ministers. And because Haman's referred to as an Agagite, it made commentators wonder whether there was a tie between the Amalekites, the constantly referred to enemies of the Hebrews, and Haman, and that's because the king of the Amalekites was Agag. So I'm filling that in for you. Now all the king's servants at the king's gate kneeled and bowed before Haman, for so had the king commanded concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel or bow. The king's servants at the gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you disobey the king's command?" Day after day they would say this to him, and he did not listen to them. So they informed Haman to see if Mordecai would stick to his guns, for he had, told them that he would never bow. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel or bow before him, Haman was filled with anger. But he thought it distasteful to kill only Mordecai, for once they had informed him of Mordecai's nationality, Haman sought to annihilate all the Jews, Mordecai's people, throughout Xerxes' entire kingdom. Now in the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Xerxes' reign, a pur, which is a lot, was cast before Haman for every day and every month. And it fell on the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, the month of Pisces. Haman said to King Xerxes, "As one nation scattered and dispersed among the nations throughout the provinces of your kingdom, whose laws are unlike those of any other nation, and who do not obey the laws of the king. It is not in the king's interest to tolerate them. If it please the king, let an edict be issued for their destruction, and I will pay 10,000 silver talents to the executors to be deposited in the king's treasuries." The king removed the signet ring from his hand, gave it to Haman, son of Hamdata the Agagite, persecutor of the Jews. The king said to Haman, "The money is yours to keep. The nation is yours to do with as you please." The king's scribes were then summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and all that Haman commanded to the king's governors and to the nobles of each nation was written to each province according to its alphabet and each according to its language, that there be no mistakes. It was written to King Xerxes' name, all of his regents, and it was sealed with the king's signet ring. Letters were sent with couriers to all the provinces of the king to annihilate, murder, and destroy all the Jews, young and old, children and women, on one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. The copies of the edict were to be proclaimed as law in every province, declaring that everybody should be ready for war that day. The couriers hurried out with the order of the king, and the law was proclaimed in Susa, the capital. Then the king and Haman sat down to drink, while the city of Susa was in turmoil. Mordecai knew all that had occurred. So Mordecai tore his clothes as if in mourning, put on sackcloth and ash. He went out into the city crying loudly and bitterly. He went up as far as the king's gate, for it was improper to enter the king's gate wearing sackcloth. And in every province, wherever the edict of the king and his law reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, crying, and wailing. Sackcloth and ash were spread out for the masses. Esther's maids and attendants came and told her about it. The queen was terrified. She sent garments with which to dress Mordecai so that he would remove the sackcloth from him, but he did not accept them. Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's chamberlains, whom he had placed in her service, and she commanded him to go to Mordecai to find out the meaning of this and what it was about. Hathach went out to Mordecai to the city square that was in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him about all that happened and about the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the right to destroy the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the law that was proclaimed in Susa, calling for their annihilation, to show Esther, tell her about it, and to instruct her to go to the king to beseech him to plead with him on behalf of her nation. The Tach went and relayed the words of Mordechai to Esther. Esther told Hatach to tell Mordechai, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes to the king and enters the inner courtyard without being summoned faces execution, unless the king extends his golden scepter, granting them life. And I've not been summoned to come to the king for 30 days now. So she wasn't going to do this. They relayed Esther's words to Mordechai, and Mordechai said to go to tell Esther, do not think you will escape the fate of all the Jews by being in the king's palace. For if you will remain silent at this time, relief and salvation will come to the Jews from another source, and you and the house of your father will be lost. And who knows if it is not for just such a time that you reach this royal position. Well, there's quite the conundrum here. It almost sounds like Mordecai's threatening her, telling her she has to act or she will die. But it begs a greater question, my friends. How do we know our fate? How do we know what our role in life may be? How does Esther know what her role in life may be? How do we recognize it? How can you ever be sure? Well, you know what? You can't. But you must not be afraid to take a chance or to trust yourself. We have to learn, my friends, to take a leap of faith. Well, you're on your own. You always were. In a land of wolves and thieves. Don't put your hope in a godly man or be a slave to what somebody else believes. Trust yourself. Trust yourself to do the things that only you know best. Trust yourself. Trust yourself to do what's right and not be second guessed. Friends, trust yourself. Always trust yourself. Listen to that little voice inside of you. Well, Esther then said to go and tell Mordechai, go and gather all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for my sake. Do not eat, do not drink for 3 days, nights, and a day. My maids and I shall also fast in the same way. Then I shall go to the king, though it is unlawful, and if I perish, I perish. Mordechai then left and did all that Esther had instructed him. On the third day, Esther donned the garments of royalty and stood in the inner courtyard of the palace, facing the palace. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the palace, facing the palace entrance. When the king saw Queen Esther standing in the courtyard, she found favor in his eyes. The king extended to Esther the golden scepter. It was in his hand, and Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. The king said to her, what is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even if it be half the kingdom, it will be granted to you. Esther said, if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the feast that I have prepared for him. The king said, tell Haman to hurry and fulfill Esther's bidding. And the king and Haman came to the feast that Esther prepared. At the wine feast, the king said to Esther, what is your plan? It will be granted you. What is your request? Even if it be half the kingdom, it shall be fulfilled. So Esther replied and said, my plea and my request, if I have found favor in the king's eyes, and if it please the king to grant my plea and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come to the feast that I shall prepare for them, and tomorrow I shall fulfill the king's bidding and reveal my desire. Well, that day Haman left happy and content, but when Haman saw Mordechai at the king's gate, and Mordechai neither rose nor trembled before him, Haman was filled with further hate against Mordechai. Haman restrained himself and went to his house and sent for his friends and his wife Zeresh. Haman told them of his glorious wealth and his many sons, and about how the king had promoted and raised him above all the king's ministers and servants. And then Haman said, in addition, along with the king, Queen Esther invited only me to the feast that she prepared. Tomorrow also I am invited to her feast along with the king. Yet all this is worthless to me whenever I see Mordechai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Now this, my friends, is a warning about ego. He can't get over it. His ego demands everybody bow. Then his wife Zeresh and her friend said to him, have gallows erected 50 cubits high, and tomorrow tell the king to have Mordechai hanged on it. Then you'll be able to go in good spirits with the king to the feast. Haman was pleased with the idea and erected the gallows. That night the king couldn't sleep, so he ordered that the book of records, the Chronicles, be brought to be read to him. It was found written that Mordecai had informed on Bigtan and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains from the threshold guards, who had planned to assassinate King Xerxes. The king asked, "What splendor and honor has been accorded to Mordecai for this?" "Nothing was done for him," the king's attendants replied. "Who's in the courtyard now?" asked the king. And just then Haman had come to the outer courtyard of the king's chambers to tell the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows he had prepared for him. "Haman's standing in the courtyard," the king's attendants answered him. "Let him come in," said the king. Haman entered, and the king said to him, "What should be done for a man whom the king wishes an honor?" Now Haman said to himself, "Who would the king wish to honor more than me?" Again, my friends, ego leads to jumping to conclusions, and we're all pretty good at that. Most often seen when we're talking to people. Notice how often you jump to a conclusion at what someone is saying rather than waiting and listening to them. So Haman said to the king, "For men whom the king wishes to honor, let them bring a royal garment that the king has worn, and a horse upon which the king has ridden, and upon whose head the royal crown has been placed. And let the garment and the horse be entrusted in the hands of one of the king's noble ministers. They shall dress the man whom the king wishes to honor, and lead him on the horse through the city square, proclaiming before him, 'So is done for the man whom the king wishes to honor.'" The king said to Haman, "Hurry, take the garment and the horse, just as you have said, and do just so for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not leave out a thing from all that you suggested." Wow, can you imagine how Haman must have taken that news? So Haman took the garment and the horse and dressed Mordecai, and he led him through the city square and proclaimed before him, "So is done for the man whom the king wishes to honor." Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate while Haman hurried to his house, miserable, his face covered. Haman told his wife and his friends about what had happened to him, and the wise men and his wife said to him, "If this Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail over him, for you will certainly fall before him." While they were still talking with him, the chamberlains of the king arrived, and they rushed to bring Haman to the feast that Esther had prepared. Now the king and Haman came to drink with Queen Esther, and again on the second day, the king said to Esther during the wine feast, "What is your plea, Queen Esther? It will be granted you. What is your request? Even if it be half the kingdom, it will be fulfilled." Queen Esther replied, said, "If I found favor in your eyes, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be granted me by my plea, and the life of my people by my request. For my people and I have been sold to be annihilated, killed, and destroyed. Had we been sold as slaves and maidservants, I would have kept silent. But indeed the persecutor is not bothered by the king's loss." King Xerxes said to Queen Esther, "Who is this? And which one is he that has the audacity to do such a thing?" "A man who is a persecutor and an enemy. This evil Haman," Esther replied. And Haman shuddered in the presence of the king and the queen. The king arose in wrath, left the wine feast, and went to the palace garden, while Haman stood up to beg Queen Esther for his life, for he realized that the king's hostility toward him was irrevocable. And the king returned from the palace garden to the wine feast chamber, and Haman had fallen upon the couch upon which Esther was reclining. The king said, "Does he even intend to have his way with the queen while I am in the palace?" As soon as these words left the king's mouth, the face of Haman was covered. Then Harvona, one of the officials that attended the king, said, "In addition, there's a gallows that Haman erected for Mordecai, who spoke for the king's good, standing at Haman's house 50 cubits high. Hang him upon it," the king said. And they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai, and the king's wrath subsided. Well, you know what, my friends, be careful what you ask for. Now, on that day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, persecutor of the Jews, and Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told the king how he was related to her. And the king removed the signet ring which he had taken from Haman, gave it to Mordecai, and Esther put Mordecai in charge of Haman's estate. Esther again spoke before the king and fell before his feet and cried and begged him to nullify the evil decree of Haman the Agagite, this plot that he had plotted against the Jews. The king extended the golden scepter to Esther, and Esther rose and stood before the king. She said, "If it please the king, and I have found favor before him, and the idea is proper to the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let an order be issued ordering the withdrawal of the letters containing the plot of Haman, son of Hamdata the Agagite, in which he ordered the destruction of the Jews throughout the king's provinces. For how can I behold the calamity that will befall my people? And how can I behold the destruction of my race?" King Xerxes said to Queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew, "See, I've given Haman's estate to Esther, and he himself was hanged on the gallows for raising his hand against the Jews. Now you can issue decrees concerning the Jews as you please, in the king's name, and sealed with the king's signet ring. For an edict written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet ring cannot be withdrawn." Now, this is an interesting situation. You see, the existing executive order can't be canceled. Can't be rescinded. Instead, a new one has to be issued. So the king's scribes were summoned in the third month, which is the month of Sivan, on its 23rd day. And an edict was written according to all that Mordecai instructed the Jews, the satraps, the governors, the nobles of the provinces, from India to Ethiopia. 127 provinces, each province according to its alphabet, and to each nation according to its language, and to the Jews according to their script and their language. He wrote it in King Xerxes' name and sealed it with the king's signet ring. He sent the letters by couriers on horseback and riding mules, bred of mares from the king's stables, saying that the king had allowed the Jews of every city to gather and stand up for their lives, to annihilate, kill, and destroy every army of any nation or province that might attack them, including their children and women, and to plunder their possessions. And on one day, in all the provinces of King Xerxes, on the 13th of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Now, why not simply issue a new order that the Jews were to be left alone? I never understood that. Copies of the edict were sent and proclaimed law in every province, clearly to all the nations, so that the Jews would be ready for the day to take revenge upon their enemies. Now, the miracle of this holiday, of course, is that this planned genocide was canceled. The couriers and riding mules from the king's stables left urgently and hurried with the king's edict, and the law was proclaimed in Susa, the capital. And Mordecai left the king's presence wearing a royal garment of blue and white, a large golden crown, a shawl of fine linen and purple wool. The city of Susa celebrated and rejoiced. For the Jews there was light and happiness, joy and glory. Friends, this is all about, fear. Fear is the great insidious enemy of us all. And it's so different from subsequent history when the Jews were forced into conversion to save their lives. This was different. This was, they simply were given the right to protect themselves. And that's what they did. And fear becomes the dominant theme, and it's always been the dominant theme, and that's why, Passover is all about, having no more fear. And, needless to say, the Jews defended themselves. There was no genocide. They sent letters out telling all of the members of their tribes that they were to observe these days of Purim on their proper dates, which is now, in the manner established by Mordecai and Queen Esther. And at the behest of Esther, she requested that the observance of these Purim days in the story be included in Scripture, which it ultimately was. Now, it's a great story. Okay, it's a story of karma. It's a story of faith, a story of fear, of belief, of bravery. It's a story of love. It's the story and the celebration of the great female who demonstrated strength through vulnerability. It is the shining ray of hope that things will work out, and someone, somewhere, is listening. Now, I want to thank all of you for listening to the whole Megillah. Now, bless you all. Have a great week. Honor the miracles in your life and be prepared to take the leaps of faith that you create, and we all create leaps of faith. Thank you once again for joining me, and I will speak to you and see you all real soon. Thanks. Bye.